Okay, so now let's talk about factoring trinomials. Before we talked about greatest common factor, we also talked about factor by grouping, and factor by grouping had 4 terms. What about when you have 3 terms and also no greatest common factor? How can we deal with that? So before we even get into it, what I want to do is just first think about a problem. What if I first just asked you to multiply a problem like this? Let's say I had x minus 2 times x plus 3. Now how would you do this? Same idea what we've dealt with before, what you've seen before is the FOIL method. So let's talk about that. Let's go ahead and come up with a solution here. FOIL the first, x times x is x squared in the outer, x times 3 is 3x, and then the inner, negative 2 times x is negative 2x, and then the last, negative 2 times 3 is negative 6, and then always combine your like terms every time you're multiplying these guys. So that'll give me x squared. That looks like plus 1x, which could be just x, and then minus 6. So what I want us to think about this problem, what we just did, now that we've got the FOIL, and I think we're all okay with that FOIL. Of course I've erased that on accident, multiply. Okay. Alright, so now that we got the idea of the foiling, let's think about what factoring is all about. It's about going backwards. So our goal now is to be able to start with this as the question and work to this as the answer. So I've got the x minus 2 times the x plus 3, and I've simplified it into x squared x squared plus x minus 6. So what I want you to do is, before I even have you do a problem, I just want you to think about 2 numbers that multiply to negative 6, and then I want you to think about 2 numbers that add to 1. And let me tell you really quick where I got those. The negative 6 I took as the last number, the 1 as I took as that middle coefficient. And I want you to do is just think about, this is sort of on the side here, think about 2 numbers that do that. 2 numbers that multiply to negative 6 and add to 1. Well, certainly 2 times 3 gives me 6. However, I want it to multiply to negative 6. So that means one of them will have to be negative. And I also want them to add to 1, which means if I made the negative 2 and positive 3, that multiplies to 6. Negative 2 times 3 is negative 6. And it adds to 1. Negative 2 plus 3 is positive 1. So this negative 2 and negative 6, believe it or not, it's not just a coincidence. These 2 numbers are exactly how we'll end up factoring. Okay. I know that's a lot of information, so let's kind of work through this slowly. A couple of examples. The more practice, we'll get that a little bit better. So let's go ahead and do an example right away. So example 1 for this video, factor. Okay. I'm going to ask you to factor. Let's do the example x squared plus 5x plus 6. Okay. So what I want you to do every time you're thinking about factoring is always try to write your work over on the side. So I'm going to do a little bit of a line here, and this will be my work over here, just my thought process. Okay. Factor x squared plus 5x plus 6. Just like in the previous example I showed you guys, you're going to want to come up with 2 numbers that multiply to something as well as add to something. And the multiply is always the last digit. So I want 2 numbers that multiply to 6, and I want 2 numbers that add to size, that middle digit. Okay, that middle coefficient, excuse me. Alright, so that's what we're going to want to be talking about here. Alright, so let's think about it. What 2 numbers multiply to 6 and add to 5? Would it be 6 and 1? 6 and 1 multiply to 6. But 6 plus 1 is 7, not 5. 2 and 3? Absolutely. 2 times 3 is 6. 2 plus 3 is 5, so that's going to do it. Right. So what that does is, once you've got that factor, then I have the x plus 2 and the x plus 3. And that's the factored answer right there. Okay. How do you check your work? Let's go back and check, just like I was telling you guys before. You should always check your work. And this will be the one I'll check. I'll leave the rest of them for you guys to check. How do you check? You FOIL this out. So x times x is x squared. Actually, let me rewrite this as, I'll write what I think is the answer, and I'll FOIL this out. X times x is x squared. X times 3 is 3x. 2 times x is 2x. 2 times 3 is 6. Combine like terms, that will give me x squared. 3x plus 2x is 5x plus 6. Is that the original question? Yes, it sure is. So that is, in fact, the correct answer. What we've decided was x plus 2 times x plus 3. Okay, so that's the factor. Let's do one more. Make sure we can understand that. Let's do one more example. So let's call this, let's see, was that example 1? So I'll call this example 2. Same directions. Factor. Now I want you guys to factor x squared minus 12x plus 35. Okay, let's do the same idea. Let's kind of do our work over here on this side. I need two numbers. Let's make a little bit more room. I need two numbers that multiply to the last digit, which is 35, and the two numbers have to add to the middle digit, which in this case is negative 12. So this is going to be a little bit trickier, maybe not too much, but let's think about it. What could those two numbers possibly be? Well, I always like to start with 35 and 1 to it. That certainly multiplies to 35, but there's no way that's going to add to negative 12, so that didn't do it. Let's try again. What else multiplies to 35? 5 times 7, absolutely. 5 times 7. 5 times 7 multiplies to 35, but 5 plus 7 is positive 12. So how am I going to get that negative 12? Well, you could think about it like this way. What if they're both negative? Would it still multiply to a positive? Yes. Would it add to a negative? Yes. So negative 5 plus negative 7 is negative 12. Negative 5 times 7 is 35. So that's going to do the trick. So that means that my solution to this factor would be the x minus 5 times the x minus 7. And again, you guys go ahead and take a moment, make sure you check your work. Okay? Alright, so let's go ahead and do one more example on this video so that we can see one more just kind of tricky one, I guess you could say. So this will be example 3. So again, I'm going to ask you to factor. So let's factor x squared minus x minus 12. Let's do the same thing. I'm going to need two numbers that multiply to my last coefficient, which is negative 12, and add to the middle coefficient, which is negative 1. You can think about that. I'm going to try 6 times 2 because that's the first thing I saw. Well, that one of them will have to be negative because it's multiplying to a negative 12. You can try even a negative 6 and a 2, but that certainly won't add to a negative 1. You could try 6 and negative 2. Also does not add to negative 1. So maybe a 3 and a 4. Okay, if I did negative 3 and positive 4, that multiplies to negative 12, but that adds to positive 1. So maybe 3 and negative 4. That certainly multiplies to negative 12, and it adds to negative 1. Okay, so sometimes it just takes a little bit longer for us to find those numbers. It's a little bit of a number game. You just got to be patient to make sure you're searching for those numbers. And always check your work. So now I've got my answer of x plus 3 times x minus 4. Of course, you better check your answer by foiling that.